So why can't we have universal health care, real wages, or affordable housing? Apparently, a majority of white people in this country would rather drown than throw anyone else a rope, at least anyone else whose skin is darker than theirs.
And this is why we have to ignore their requests to unite. It will not be in our best interests. Throughout the Old Testament, the ancient Israelites were repeatedly warned against forming alliances and uniting with other nations. Their covenant with the Most High called for them to be separate and holy, dedicated to His divine plan. But what about today? Is that call to separation still necessary?
White resentment confirms what LBJ warned us about 60 years ago. This is an astonishing story. Lyndon Johnson once told Bill Moyers that if you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best black man, he'll empty his pockets for you. And 60 years later, science has caught up. A new study from the University of Delaware political scientists published in Sage Journals found that white Americans, even poor ones, turn against the social safety net the moment they think non-whites might benefit too. Researchers asked over 700 white respondents whether their group was losing politically compared to minorities. The ones who said yes suddenly opposed economic redistribution, even when it would have helped them.
Are we surprised that the research is showing that these folks will support programs until they see that those programs also help non-whites? No, we've seen it happen time and time again.
Even when it would have helped them. In nearly every other wealthy democracy, high inequality drives demand for stronger social safety net programs, but not here. Here, white resentment beats white self-interest every time.
It's because white supremacy is a very powerful stronghold. Folks would rather cause harm to themselves than allow others to benefit in any way. Their puppet masters make them believe that brown people are the problem.
Republican white men had been railing against affirmative action in college admissions for decades. So a few years ago, when it went away, they were pretty excited about it.
Affirmative action is deeply unfair on every level. Doesn't matter what race you are talking about. If one race is able to get into college with scores that are 200 points below another race, that is obviously racist, and it's obviously discrimination under the Equal Protection Clause. And that's exactly what was happening when it came to Harvard University as well as the University of North Carolina.
So all this time, they have used the same talking points to make it seem like super intelligent white men were being discriminated against to favor ignorant brown folks. But you know what they won't talk about? How colleges grant enrollment preferences to reward those who financially support their institutions. Let's look at this from Stanford's Center on Poverty and Inequality. It's entitled, "At the Elite Colleges, Dim White Kids." The article points to the research of two researchers working for the Educational Testing Service. They looked at the academic profiles of students admitted into 146 colleges in the top 2 tiers of the Barron's College Guide and matched them against the institution's requirements in terms of high school grade point average, SAT, ACT, letters of recommendations, and involvement in extracurricular activities. They found that about 15% of freshmen enrolled at America's selective colleges are white teens who failed to meet their institution's minimum admissions standards. It says white students who failed to make the grade on all counts were nearly twice as prevalent on such campuses as Black and Hispanic students who received an admissions break based on their ethnicity or race. Who are these mediocre white students getting into institutions such as Harvard, Wesley, Notre Dame, etc.? It says a sizable number are recruited athletes who, research has shown, will perform worse on average than other students with similar academic profiles, mainly as a result of the demands their coaches will place on them. It says a larger share, however, are students who gained admission through their ties to people the institution wanted to keep happy, with alumni, donors, faculty members, administrators, and politicians topping the list. Applicants who stood no chance of gaining admission without connections are only the most blatant beneficiaries of such admissions preferences. It goes on to say, leaders at many selective colleges say they have no choice but to instruct their admissions offices to reward those who financially support their institutions because keeping donors happy is the only way they can keep the place afloat.
We were told by conservatives that affirmative action is discriminatory. White students, namely men, have been loudly declaring for decades that they were being unfairly excluded from elite institutions because of affirmative action. So now that the playing field is supposedly level, white men should be winning, right? Right? Except 2024 was the first year that a full freshman class had been admitted under the ban. So researchers analyzed federal enrollment data from 71 elite private colleges and universities. They counted exactly how many additional white male students walked through the doors after affirmative action ended. 72. Yep, 72 white men total across 71 schools. So the group that spent 30 years insisting that they were the real victims of discriminatory admissions, they gained about 1 seat per school. Let's start with what affirmative action in college admissions actually is, or was. The first major Supreme Court case on this was Regents of the University of California versus Bakke in 1978. This case struck down a quota. From the beginning, they were saying quotas. No, we're not doing that. The UC Davis Medical School had reserved 16 of 100 seats explicitly for minority applicants. And the court said, no way, unconstitutional. You can't carve out seats by race. Cool. But Justice Lewis Powell, writing for a fractured court, said universities could still consider race as one factor among many in a holistic review, specifically to achieve the educational benefits of a diverse student body.
So affirmative action did not focus on skin color only. It considered several factors. If it was only about brown skin, how did white women benefit most from it? But truth does not matter for some folks. They need the talking points because they want to keep the knee on our necks. This comes from the Miami Times. It says studies show white women benefit more from DEI than black people. It says since returning to the White House, Trump has waged a relentless war on what his administration calls woke policies. His rhetoric has stoked resentment against DEI, falsely painting it as favoritism for Black Americans, yet, according to experts and multiple studies, white women have long been the ones gaining the most from these very initiatives. It says actually everyone but Black folks benefit from DEI, Texas Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett said in an earlier published interview. She said, "We were always the intended target to benefit, but the way that most policies are written, people learned how to game the system. Reese Colbert, a political commentator, told The Root that this false narrative has been pushed strategically. The notion that Black people are the primary beneficiaries of DEI, despite evidence to the contrary, has fueled irrational hostility, often from those who benefited most, she said. Tell us again why this should be our fight. I would think that those who benefited most should be on the front lines. But here is what this administration is saying. They are ending illegal discrimination and restoring merit-based opportunity. Is that what they're doing? Or are they making it easier for the top 1% to attain even more wealth? And then they tell white folks that immigrants and brown folks are to blame. Here's the thing though. A lot of people know that something is seriously wrong in this country, and this is why some are saying we need to unite and fight against it. What they're really saying is this: help us fight so that things will get better for us. And we need to say absolutely not. History has shown that others benefit most from our oppression. We're going to look at some natural examples of that first, and then some spiritual reasons why we cannot unite with them. Let's look at this article from Side Post entitled Political Loser Perceptions Alter White American Views on Wealth Distribution. This says white Americans who feel they are on the losing side of politics are more likely to oppose economic redistribution programs. Why are they opposed to it? They think it's going to benefit us. For some strange reason, they cannot understand that the top 1% now control about 31% of the nation's total household wealth, which is equivalent to about 52 trillion in net worth. How did they get it? Do you think it was because of their intellect or because they worked harder? No. They make sure major funding will go to those in their inner circle. So should we call it welfare? Let's look at this information from National Community Reinvestment Coalition. It says the racial wealth gap is staggering, and here's why. The median Black household holds $44,000 in net worth compared to $284,000 for white households. This means Black households have roughly 15 cents for every $1 in wealth that white households have. This gap has remained largely consistent over time. So did DEI and affirmative action really benefit us or them if the gap remained consistent? But the majority of white Americans think that something is being taken from them if programs are put in place to benefit our people. So 60 years after the March on Washington, Black economic inequality persists, this article from inequality.org says. The subtitle says, 60 years without substantially narrowing the racial wealth divide is a policy failure. But Democrats want our people to focus on voting only. Why? So they can remain in power, and then they fight for the rights of everyone else. Take a look at what they've been fighting for. And please know that this is not about voting Democrat or Republican. The article is saying that 60 years later, Black economic inequalities still persist. It goes on to say that 60 years after Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech, African Americans are on a path where it will take 500 more years to reach economic equality. 500 years. It says our country has taken significant steps towards racial equity since the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, but growing income and wealth inequality over the last 4 decades has supercharged historic racial wealth disparities, slowing and even reversing many of those gains. Did you hear that? So, who are the so-called black leaders really fighting for? I think we know. Most of them had to take the pledge. It goes on to say, yet there has been minimal progress in most socioeconomic indicators. At this pace, it would still take centuries for African Americans to reach parity with white Americans. For every dollar of white family income, African Americans had 58 cents in 1967. In 2021, African Americans had 62 cents to the white household's dollar. So the median household income has grown just 0.36% since the turn of the century, and it is still lower today than the white median family income in 1963. And yet folks are still upset because they think civil rights provided benefits to us that we didn't deserve. Let's remember that the civil rights movement was a social movement aimed at abolishing legalized racial segregation, discrimination, and disenfranchisement. They were fighting to put an end to wicked laws and practices designed to block progress in our communities. Here's the problem. It wasn't a social or civil issue. It was a human rights issue. Listen to this from ACLU. Why the fight for racial justice is a human rights issue. On International Human Rights Day, the ACLU is advocating for a long sought after reparatory justice to end the continued abuses against Black and brown communities. So it's saying failed reparations worsen slavery's legacy. It says the U.S. led efforts to create the UN human rights system after World War II, including drafting the UDHR, but the country has struggled to follow through with its commitments. The U.S. has undermined the UDHR's impact and failed to fully adopt human rights as a part of its domestic laws and policies. One significant area the U.S. has been criticized for is failing to fulfill its human rights obligations on racial and reparatory justice for Black diasporic communities, especially by hindering progress on forming a commission to study the system of enslavement. During enslavement, Black people were forced to labor for the enrichment of the burgeoning U.S., and after slavery was abolished, Jim Crow laws, Black codes in the South, and de facto segregation inflicted violent exploitation and repression on a so-called emancipated populace. It says slavery's legacy meant many African Americans faced the physical and psychological consequences of state-sanctioned violence, including widespread lynchings and targeted massacres. These crimes and injustices were part of a pervasive campaign of deliberate terror and oppression inflicted upon Black diasporic communities in the U.S. So do you see that this is not about civil or social laws? We're talking about systemic human rights violations. So we need to make sure we get the wording right, because there is a difference between civil and human rights. And I know that a lot of our people suffered, they died for civil rights. We certainly cannot and should not ignore their struggle. With that being said, what happened to us is a human rights issue, and we need to be clear about that. Let's look at this from civil rights law to make sure we understand the difference. Civil rights come from laws and constitutions, while human rights apply to everyone everywhere. Everyone everywhere. So no one can give us the right to be what the Creator made us to be. He created us with inalienable rights. These man-made wicked laws that were used to justify wicked behavior is based on skin color. You can't legislate the color of your skin. This came from our Creator. But this is why the alphabet community is quick to say that they were born that way, and yet they can wake up one day and decide to be celibate. That's a choice. You don't have to be intimate with anyone. It goes on to say human rights belong to every person on the planet by virtue of being alive, while civil rights are specific legal protections a government grants to people within its borders. The distinction matters because it determines where your protections come from, who enforces them, and what happens when they're violated. Human rights exist whether or not a government acknowledges them. Civil rights exist only because a government wrote them into law. So by fighting for civil rights, it tied us to issues like abortion, same-sex relationships, and voting. Folks can decide whether or not they want to do those things. They have a choice. We cannot decide to be another race. The idea of granting us civil rights was bait and switch. He that giveth can take it away. Those rights yoked us to certain immoral issues that significantly weakened what the initial fight was about. This is what the initial fight was about. It says the civil rights movement was driven by systemic racial discrimination, segregation, economic inequality, political disenfranchisement, and the failure to enforce constitutional rights for African Americans. So the movement had its origins in over 400 years of oppression marked by slavery, racism, and white supremacy. Those inhumane practices restricted our social, economic, and political advancements. So instead of demanding human rights, the fights morphed into fighting for moral and civil rights. And as long as we allow them to categorize our struggle under civil violations, it keeps us yoked to immoral behaviors. Let's see who benefited most from civil rights. Look at this report from NBC News. Different fight, same goal. How the Black freedom movement inspired early gay activists. The civil rights and early homophile movements shared leaders, ideas, and ultimately the same goal, according to historians. Eric Cervini, an LGBTQ historian, is quoted as saying, "Every single element of what we know of as pride in gay rights, and especially the pre-Stonewall homophile movement, was borrowed from the Black freedom movement." It says, unlike so many other episodes, it kind of combined issues of homosexuality and trans issues. Stein, author of Rethinking the Gay and Lesbian Movement, told NBC News. This ABC News article asks this question: what is Black Lives Matter? It says, from the start, Black Lives Matter has been about LGBTQ lives. We have to separate ourselves from all of these groups wanting to unite with us to use our struggle for their benefit. Listen to this from Think. When Black Lives Matter, Black trans people must be freed from discrimination and violence. There can be no hierarchy created in this moment to determine which Black lives are more valuable than others. It says not only have Black transgender people borne the brunt of the violent police system, we fought against it as well. Black queers, from the civil rights leader Bayard Rustin, who helped organize the 1963 March on Washington, to the co-founders of Black Lives Matter, and it names the ladies. It says they have helped shape and organize some of the most effective strategies and movements for the equality of Black people. Now listen to what they're saying. Race and gender equality go hand in hand for Black LGBTQ people. Transphobia and sexism are part of white supremacy, and so it all must go. Are you kidding me? Transphobia and sexism are part of white supremacy. A lot of the supremacists are engaging in the same practices. What do you think buck breaking was all about? Bottom line is, if you're going to walk uprightly before the Most High, you are going to have to put away the pagan practices. They do not honor our Heavenly Father. He said He is holy and He expects the same from His people. We need Him to fight for us and deliver us from the hands of our enemies. Do you honestly think that it's so that His people can continue to behave like heathens? Absolutely not. Choose this day whom you will serve. You cannot walk uprightly and think that you can do what thou wilt. Listen to this from Isaiah 31 through 2. Woe to the rebellious children, says the Most High, who take counsel but not of me, and who devise plans but not of my spirit, that they may add sin to sin. So who are they listening to? The wicked. It goes on to say, who walk to go down to Egypt, and have not asked my advice, to strengthen themselves in the strength of Pharaoh, and to trust in the shadow of Egypt. What is this talking about? It's a warning against forming alliances with foreign powers without the Most High's approval. And it is also talking about rebellious Israelites who continue in sin. Exodus 19:6, we see here that the Most High is saying, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. We are a holy nation. This is a distinct spiritual identity, not just a physical one. Scripture repeatedly warned the nation of Israel against making alliances with other nations. It served as protection against idolatry and syncretism. We were given specific instructions to remain separate for a reason. Foreign nations worshipped false gods and engaged in pagan customs that were not pleasing to the Most High. There can be no compromise in that regard, because there are consequences for disobedience. Spiritual compromise and idolatry, political vulnerability to foreign powers, and divine judgment, including oppression, defeat, and exile. That's why we're in our current situation today. It's not like He didn't warn us beforehand. We're still experiencing the fallout because we ignored His warning. In Deuteronomy 28:25 through 29, we were told that we would be defeated before our enemies and become troublesome to all the kingdoms of the earth. When you read verse 26, it says, your carcasses will be food for all the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth, and no one will frighten them away. It makes me think of the strange fruit hanging from the trees. Were they not food for the birds of the air and the beasts of the earth? It goes on to talk about being struck with boils, tumors, and the scab and the itch, which you cannot be healed, and also being struck with madness and blindness and confusion of heart. You will grope at noonday as a blind man gropes in darkness, and this part is key. You will not prosper in your ways. You will be only oppressed and plundered continually, and no one will save you. So the punishment was severe, because to whom much is given, much is required. In Deuteronomy 7:6, we see that it says, the Most High placed the nation of Israel above the other nations. Not only that, he said, they are his special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. He placed them above the other nations for a reason. They had an assignment to be his witnesses in the earth, and the covenant was given to them. Yes, there are those who still refuse to accept that. So we need to finish this discussion on the live this coming Wednesday. We need to talk about the Christians. Can we unite with them? Hopefully this message has been a blessing to you. Please like, share, and hype. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.